How would you approach that if there are kids, who are maybe age 5 and 6 and, their teacher just offhandedly mentions this evolution in the classroom? How would you sort of go about preparing them for that, even at such a young age?
Well, let me give another example, because quite often, when I'm out preaching at a church, might get asked to do the children's Sunday school, or there might be a school associated with the church and they ask us to come and talk to the children. So let's say I've got elementary age kids, or primary age kids, we'd say in Australia, and I'll do a talk on dinosaurs. And during the talk, I'll ask for a little question of the kids, and I say, how many kids here believed dinosaurs lived and died out millions of years ago? And even in Christian schools, they would raise their hands and say yes. How many people think they lived and died out thousands of years ago? And I might be lucky to get 1 or 2 hands. So already at that age, they're reading books, seeing cartoons, watching documentaries of mum and dad at the age of dinosaurs from an evolutionary perspective, living millions and millions of years ago. And it goes on through higher education. So I'll give you an example. My daughter, my youngest daughter, she went to school here in Brisbane, where we're recording today. And at university, she studied biology, and she came home one day and she said, Dad, you never believe what happened in class today. Her very, very first biology class, the lecturer, first thing he said was, would all the Christian students please identify yourself? Now, she didn't raise her hand. She's my daughter, but she said a handful of kids raised their hands. And he turned around to them and said, you might want to rethink doing this class because it's going to destroy your faith. And the feedback I've had, from students in Christian families where I go, they say there are atheist groups on campus and they look for the new intake and they're particularly targeting the Christian kids. And they've already got the questions lined up and saying, how would you answer this? Well, science has shown this, so what does that mean for, your belief about God creating, etc.? And the kids don't have any answers. So what does that do? They retreat into their shell.
Yeah.
And in some ways that retreat actually is part of the issue, I believe, with the church. Because when I talked about the church teaching Bible stories or lessons from the Bible, even the parents and the pastors were also bombarded with that evolutionary teaching. And so in some respects, they're also not aware that there's information that is out there to help them. And that's why a ministry, like CMI exists. But I try to, I don't know what's the word here. When I said earlier that a lot of people look at those dry statistics and they don't think it applies to their kids. So sometimes when I'm with a congregation, I've done the talk and I say, look, maybe your church is better than most. Maybe your church, tries to address this problem somehow, and you don't think your kids are going to leave. So, instead of 88%, what if it's only 50%? Is that an acceptable number to you? What if it's only 20% of your children? Because those statistics, they're 88% of somebody's children.
Yeah.
And those surveys have been done over different denominational groups. So we know that it's not just a national problem, but a global problem. I mean, James, this is so serious. People hear this and, we're dismissive. I would just beg people, don't be dismissive of this issue. Because as I said, it's been going on for so many years across different countries, across different denominations. And this will happen to the majority of our children in the church unless you do something about it. So I'm a great believer, this might be cliche, but I really am a great believer in that evangelism starts at home. So with my children, I would say things like, around the dinner table, I'd say, hey, if you're at school tomorrow, what if somebody asked you a question like, well, I think dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. How would you address that? Yeah. And so what we have to remember is sometimes when our kids are in the church, even though we think they're enthusiastically following the faith, sometimes they're borrowing our faith.
Yes.
And I've written an article about this on creation.com, are your children borrowing your faith? So how do we gauge what our children believe? Well, you can't find out what somebody believes unless you ask questions.
Yes, yeah.
And so ask questions of your own children. Find out where they're at in their faith. What do they believe and why do they believe what they believe? And you'll quickly find out what level they're at. And then you've got something to address and work with.
Yeah, definitely.
So in that light, James, because of that survey I did, it's called Fallout, by the way, and you're going to mention in a minute where people can get that. I wrote this, or co-wrote this booklet. It's called The Creation Survival Guide and How to Survive Education with Your Faith Intact. It's just a booklet. It's available on creation.com. And these are, if you like, it's a snapshot of the major questions that students are going to get. And it also helps them to prepare for the environment. Yeah. And there's we originally produced it in a DVD, but it's available in streaming. So that's the survey I did on campuses, and it goes on a little bit more. So when students mention natural selection or fossils, we actually have one of our scientists talking about it, showing that there are answers and the problems with the evolutionary particular view. So, and as I said, we're making that free as a result of this podcast today.
So thanks, Gary. Yes, the documentary will be free. Link in the description. This is the first time ever that it's been free, so go check that out. Thanks so much, Gary, for being here and chatting with me today. It's been really insightful, and I think that this will be able to go out to tons of other people and they'll be able to hear it as well. Thanks so much, Gary, for joining us.
You're welcome.